All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to logically deconstruct the upcoming 2027 JC Star Level 1 grid connection requirements. Now, since you follow energy infrastructure policy, you already know securing the grid is absolutely paramount, right? But what happens when the regulatory framework built to protect that infrastructure just fundamentally breaks down when you actually look closely at it? Today, we're sticking strictly to the primary sources, specifically the official responses from the Information Technology Promotion Agency, or the IPA, who actually runs the JC Star label. And man, what we found is honestly pretty startling. Let's kick things off with a pretty crucial question. What happens when a mandatory security label doesn't actually guarantee security? Because based on the documents we're unpacking today, this upcoming mandate has this massive, glaring disconnect between its perceived security value and its actual bureaucratic reality. You see, starting in 2027, the J-Star Level 1 label, which was originally just a voluntary promotional thing, is being morphed into a mandatory gatekeeper for solar PV and battery storage grid connections. So we're looking at a system where the label meant to keep the grid safe might not actually be confirming what operators and regulators just assume it is. So we are going to deconstruct this whole house of cards. Here's our blueprint for demolition. We'll cover the 2027 grid mandate, the 3 missing pillars, the business exception, the model number mismatch, the safety illusion, and finally, why this system essentially confirms nothing. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the 2027 grid mandate, repurposing a voluntary label. Section 2, the 3 missing pillars, the official no's from the IPA. You know when an agency takes a voluntary label and suddenly turns it into a hard legal requirement? You totally expect the organization running that label to be heavily involved, right? But when they were questioned about this new mandate, the IPA's written answers revealed 3 massive holes. Basically, they gave us 3 definitive no's. First up, the IPA has no official public document or view on citing this label as a legal grid requirement. The mandate is literally being pushed entirely by the citing side, the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, without any design input from the label operator itself. Second, there's absolutely no official document stating that the label doesn't replace real-world installation and operational security measures. And third, on the official product list, there is 0 distinction made for products that acquired the label through an exception. So to you or me looking at it, all the labels look exactly the same. Moving on to Section 3, the business exception, security versus market fairness. When we're talking about critical grid infrastructure, you naturally assume that any exception to a security rule would be based on a really rigorous technical assessment. But that is not what the primary documents show at all. You'd think a grid security label evaluates technical safety, right? The whole core premise of the JC Star system targets devices with direct internet or IP communication functions. But get this, non-IP communication devices can actually be granted exceptions to get the label. Is it because they have some awesome alternative security protocols? Nope. It's literally just because a competing product exists on the market. We are looking at a wild, direct contradiction between actual technical security requirements and administrative market fairness. The smoking gun here is right in the IPA's own supplementary guidance. It explicitly states that this is, and I quote, an exceptional measure to prevent business disadvantages. This isn't a security judgment at all. It's an ironical loophole based entirely on vendor market competition. Think about it. If your equipment doesn't have an IP function, your ability to connect to the grid in 2027 might depend entirely on whether a competitor releases a similar product. So a variable completely 100% unrelated to grid safety is what determines whether entry to the grid is allowed. Make it make sense. And what's really severely lacking here is transparency. Whether an exception is allowed or not is decided individually, totally behind closed doors by the IPA, based on a vendor's own explanatory materials. And there are absolutely no publicly disclosed criteria for how they make this judgment. The kind of transparency you usually need for administrative grid entry is just gone, replaced by these completely subjective evaluations. And remember what we saw with the 3 no's? Once this exception is granted, it looks identical to a standard, technically evaluated security approval on the public list. Section 4, the model number mismatch, paralyzing the grid operators. Okay, I want you to imagine you're a reviewer. Your job is to make sure the equipment being installed matches the equipment on the approved security list. Sounds like a really simple cross-check, right? Well, let's walk through it. Step 1, you check the commercial equipment model number on site. Step 2, you cross-reference that with a conformity product list. Easy enough. But at step 3, you hit a massive brick wall. According to the official guidance, the J-star identification model number might differ entirely from the commercial product model number, and there is literally no public mechanism for a third party to verify how they correspond. This completely breaks the very first step of third-party verification. It paralyzes the entire review process right at step 4 unless the vendor just voluntarily decides to provide that mapping information. What a nightmare. Section 5. The safety illusion. Missing the big picture. Look, a label on a piece of hardware is one thing, but how that hardware is actually integrated into a wider physical network, that's what actually determines the safety of the grid. Yet there are exactly zero, literally zero, official materials published that prevent the dangerous misreading that a labeled product equates to a safely installed product. The way this system is set up leaves the ground wide open for operators and contractors to mistakenly believe that just because they bought a JC Star certified box, their entire site is magically secure. And this gets even crazier. When researchers explicitly ask the iPad if a dangerous exposed installation configuration, like say leaving a web management portal completely wide open to the public internet, changes the effect of the label, the iPad delivered this absolute knockout punch of a response. They sincerely replied, "We are sorry, but we do not understand the intent of the question seriously." Now, to be fair, this isn't even them dodging the question, it's just the structural reality of the system. Within the framework of this label, the installation configuration simply does not exist as a variable. It evaluates the isolated product's attributes and absolutely nothing more. It's like passing a car inspection just because there's a certified safety label slopped on the steering wheel, even while the engine is literally on fire and the brakes are completely missing. The label tells us absolutely nothing about the safety of the actual installation on the ground. Section 6. Confirming nothing. The collapse of the 2027 review. So when 2027 rolls around and this becomes mandatory nationwide, what exactly is the grid review process confirming? Well, look at how every single verification step hits a structural dead end that is confirmed by primary sources. You try to cross-check model numbers, they might not match. You try to confirm the scope of what was actually evaluated. Well, that requires reading complex configuration diagrams that aren't even strictly mandated in the current review proposal. You try to understand what security standard was met, you can't, because exceptions based on market competition aren't distinguished from actual technical approvals. You assume the label's technical evaluation is correct. That relies entirely on vendor self-declaration, and the IPI explicitly stated they don't even verify conformity at issuance. And finally, you try to determine installation safety, completely outside the scope of the label. The whole thing just falls apart. So we've essentially watched this whole house of cards fall. The analysis of the primary sources shows a complete logical, technical, and legal collapse of this mandate. It mandates a massive review process that, in practice, confirms absolutely nothing about the actual, real-world security of the grid. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to take away from today's explainer. If this system requires a huge administrative burden, yet relies on closed-door exceptions and confirms absolutely nothing about real-world installation safety, why on earth are we blindly marching toward 2027? Thanks for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning the systems that run our world.